Number one is what I call Aspie Fatigue. Now, I did an entire video on Aspie Fatigue. You may want to look at that, but to understand what Aspie Fatigue is, and you probably know, that's where you're trying to mask and trying to pretend that you are neurotypical, trying to get along with the world in general, other people, and it becomes tiring. Now, to explain this, I think of a dog. Do you have a pet dog? Know somebody that does? But imagine taking that dog, whatever one it is, doesn't matter, and teaching it to walk on its hind legs. And you can teach dogs to do that. What's more, you can take that dog and you can dress him up in a little dress or a little suit, whatever, put a hat on him, and he can walk around and act like a little human being. But not for long. Eventually, the dog is going to have to come back down on all fours because he gets tired of doing that. Now, when I'm out and about with wherever I happen to go where there's normal people, I hate to say I'm not normal because it's normal to be abnormal, but when I'm out and about, I kind of feel like I'm that dog on its hind legs. I'm putting on a show. It's kind of like I'm in the middle of a circus. And I've got my little dress on. Not literally, don't quote me on this, but you get the point. This is an analogy. And I'm like that dog walking on its hind legs, and it's just tiring. And I can't wait to get home. Not just so I can get away from people, but so I can get away from the masking, so I can get away from trying to be acceptable. And I don't try as hard as I used to because I've become more and more comfortable with myself. By the way, I did a video, I think we uploaded it yesterday, depends on when you're watching this, obviously, on how Aspies progress over time. You'll want to watch that. So, number one is Aspie Fatigue, some of the most difficult things for Aspies. And as we go through these 6 or 7 points, I'd kind of like to know in the comments, if you don't mind, which ones that you identify with, and which ones do you think, okay, I don't identify with, or maybe you think I'm just flat out wrong. Or you may have some others that I didn't think of. I can almost guarantee you can think of some things that I didn't put on my list here. Number two, one of the things that is very difficult for people with Asperger syndrome is the fact that the world does not change. Now, the truth of the matter is, research changes, clinical studies make people more and more aware of what Aspies have to go through, but people, their neurology just doesn't change. Hasn't changed much for countless thousands of years. Yesterday, I was reading an article, can't remember exactly what it was, but the guy was using the term spurgy. He said some people are spurgy. These people are spurges. I didn't know what it meant, so I had to Google it and look it up, and what it meant was a derogatory term, meant to be a pejorative, and what it meant was people with Asperger syndrome. And I thought, geez, this guy is so out of touch. What is wrong with him? Well, the point of that is this. I mean, whoever wrote the article. But the point is this, the world is not going to change. People are people. There's always going to be derogatory people, people who do not understand you, and what's more, they don't want to understand you. In fact, there are some people out there, and I'm sure you've experienced this, but they are glad that you have Asperger syndrome because for some reason it makes them feel superior. You're somebody that they can pick on. Some people just don't grow up. They're still in 3rd grade. They may be 50, 60, 70 years old. They still act like 3rd graders. They're still being bullies. I don't understand that, but I know it's just a matter of fact. This is what life is all about. So one of the things that we find extremely difficult is the fact that we have to go out in the world that just changes very, very, very little. Academically, it changes. Clinically, it changes. But the people that you meet at the workplace, on the street, in the store, wherever you happen to go, are pretty much the same. And you're going to have to deal with the same thing every single time. Now, that's particularly true in school. I heard somebody say not long ago that they believe that bullying was learned behavior. I'd like to think it is because it can be either unlearned or it could be intervention. Teach people not to be bullies. But I think looking back at human history, it's always been there. I kind of believe that's natural. I think it's innate. Now, if you disagree with me, I'd kind of like to know again. Just tell me what you think in the comments. Number 3, one of the things that we find very difficult to deal with, this is kind of like number 1, but we got to adapt. You've got to adapt to the majority. And the overwhelming majority, depends on whose estimates you are listening to, but about 94% of the human population don't have Asperger syndrome. And that may be low. Could be only 1% of the population has Asperger syndrome. Maybe 6% has autism of one form or another. The numbers, they change depending on what their criteria is, but it's somewhere around 1 to 6% of people have autism or Asperger syndrome. And we got to adapt. The problem with that is sometimes we can't adapt. Try as hard as we can, and you know what? I do try. I don't try as hard as I used to, said that earlier, but I do try, and I love to get home. Love to get away from the pressure. Love to come home, kick my shoes off, turn on the computer, listen to music, sing along, believe it or not. I can actually do a pretty good Elvis. Maybe I'll do that for you sometime. I also do Bullwinkle. That you probably don't want to hear. But number 4 is you do not change. You don't change. We can adjust. I mean, we can make superficial changes. I was going to say differences, but we can make. We can kind of adapt, by putting on the mask and acting like we're in a stage play and we're going to play the role of somebody else, and we put on that little act. Maybe somebody we've watched on the internet, or maybe somebody we watched on television years ago. We just say television because that's all there was other than movies. And a lot of Aspies actually role play. They actually have a person in their mind, maybe some famous person, and they wind up talking like that person, behaving like that person. That is their way of adapting. But what we're saying is one of the things that we find so very difficult, so hard, so challenging is our core nature, our personality. It just is what it is. We make those adaptations, but we can't change. The core person that we are will never change. We will always be who we are. Personally, I don't know about you, but personally, I don't want to change. I understand there's some difficulties, but no matter who you are in the world, you're going to have some form of difficulty, some kind of challenges you're going to have to face. And I kind of like being an Aspie. I like having Asperger syndrome. A lot of people kind of frown at me when I say that, but I like it. Now, another challenge that we face, something that we find very difficult, is that people expect us, neurotypical people expect us to be like them. They expect us to be typical. And the way that I like to explain that is when you are a child, when you were a child, I'm assuming you're no longer a child, but when you were a child, they would notice your behavior, and in most cases, they would say that you were well behaved because you were so quiet. Now, I know there's some people with Asperger syndrome, they go to the other extreme. And that's where they get that term spurge or spurgy, and they're kind of noisome. They can really be overactive. But most of us, when we were kids, we were just quiet because we didn't know how to socialize. It just didn't come natural to us like it does to everyone else, and it was kind of confusing. And neurotypical people would look at us and they would experience our personalities in their classroom or at home or at church or in the neighborhood, and they would say, "My, what a well-behaved child. Must have good parents." Well, then we would become teenagers, and then they would say, he or she really is mature for their age. And I think maybe we are. I know when I was a teenager, almost all my friends were older than me. Also, just growing up, I tend to hang out with kids who are 2, 3 years older than me. I don't know why. I didn't have a lot of friends, but the ones I did, I seemed to click with kids who were a little bit more mature. So maybe there's some truth to that. But when you become an adult, I hate to use the term weird. I don't know why, because everyone else uses it. So, yeah, they just say you're kind of weird. And that usually starts somewhere in your late teens. So now I'm talking about adults. When you're in high school, junior high, whatever, your peers, they never say you're mature for your age, or very seldom. Now, if you had a classmate that said you were mature for your age, let me know in the comments, but I kind of doubt it. They would call you all kinds of names, probably bully you a little bit, push you around. Fortunately, when I was a kid, I experienced very little of that. But almost every Aspie I come in contact with tells me, yeah, when I was a kid, we had some serious problems with bullying. It's like we were in a world of narcissists, a world of psychopaths. And then when they grow up, they have trouble relating with children because when they were growing up, they had difficulty with children that were their age. Totally understandable. But the world, as adults, expects us to be typical. And you try to get a job and you go to work, you do your work very well. We've talked about this in other videos. You got a good attitude, you know how to do the job, but you wind up getting fired because you just don't fit in. How frustrating is that? They expect you to be like them, talking about neurotypical people. But truth of the matter is we are not, and that brings us to number 6. You probably knew this one was coming ahead of time. One of the things that we find very hard to deal with, very difficult to deal with, is flat out abuse. We just talked about that. Bullying, whatever. The only thing I can tell you about that, or the only thing that comes to mind at the moment, is that you will never find an abuse-free environment. Well, maybe. Maybe when you are home alone, all by yourself, you can say, you know, I think this is the environment where I belong to. Nobody is abusing me. But in a sense, if you are being forced to be alone in your home, isn't that a type of abuse when you stop and think about it? I think, I think maybe it is. So you just can't escape it. One way or the other, we have to deal with it, and it's not going away. I don't find it a serious problem, but I find it a problem. I wish it weren't there, but everybody has a problem of some kind, so I'm just going to deal with it because I know it's not going to go away. Number 7, same thing is toxic people will always be there. Number 7, toxic people. They aren't going away. Now, we're not talking about people in general, but we're talking about that one, maybe 2 individuals in your life who is just toxic. I can't remember ever going to a job. There wasn't this one guy who was just a jerk. I mean, more so than everybody else. You know, I can actually go back and name some of the people I knew back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, jobs I had a lot of them. And I could say this guy, he's just toxic. He's just toxic. I can think of one person, not going to name him, not even going to mention their gender, unless they figure out who I'm talking about. But there's one person. I literally cannot be in the same room with this person. Sometimes I have to be. But unless I absolutely positively have to be in the same room with that person or the same place at the same time, I'm not going. Sorry. Some people are just that toxic. Being around them, next thing you know, you're having serious problems with depression and you sink into that deep low. Guess what? Go back in human history far as you can go, there have always been toxic people. They're not going to go away. And one of the difficult things that Aspies have to deal with is those toxic people. Now, neurotypical people seem to deal better with toxic people. You know, the psychopaths, the narcissists, they seem to be better at dealing with those people than we are. People with Asperger syndrome are. Best thing we can do, just get away from them. At least that's my opinion. Maybe you have a better opinion. You don't fight with them because they like to fight. That just encourages them to be more toxic. Number 8. One thing that we find very hard very difficult is that avoidance, and we mentioned this briefly a moment ago, that avoidance is survival. I mean, if we're going to survive, a lot of times, I don't mean occasionally, I mean a lot of times, we just got to get away. We just got to get away. That is why I feel so sorry. I feel so much empathy. They say Aspies don't have empathy. We do have affectionate empathy. And I feel so sorry for children who are forced by government mandate to be in an environment that is, by its very nature, to the child with Asperger syndrome, abusive. And people just don't get it. Teachers, okay, like we talked before, isn't that child well behaved? Yeah, but there's a reason why the child is well behaved, is because they're being terrorized in a sense. I mean, they're going through a very, very difficult time, and the way of reacting is to go into a shell. That is what we are up against. Look at those rectangles on the screen. Let's keep this conversation going if you want to. If you're done talking, go ahead, click off the video, and we'll see you next time. But if you do want to keep talking, click on one of those rectangles. Until then, we'll see you.